So many people in America, when we talk about addiction, they think about alcohol and drugs. But addiction goes much further than just alcohol and drugs. I have an addictions expert here with me this evening that we've decided to select, and he doesn't know it, as our resident addiction expert and specialist, which will be coming back on occasions to expound on other forms of addiction in more detail. But tonight, this is our first time airing this show. This is our first production of the year 2002, because we know for you, it needs to be a new you in 2002. So sit back and relax. Take a close look at this program, because the words that we share, the ideas that we share with you, will probably hit close to home, if not personally, but hit close to home as it relates to maybe a family member, a loved one, a friend, or even an acquaintance. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our resident addiction expert, Mr. Johnny Banks.
Thank you, Renaud.
Johnny, I'd like to thank you for coming out and taking the time to work with us here at Recovery, It's Your Choice. Because I know this is something that's dear and near to your heart. Without revealing too much information, we're not going to ask you to tell your story as it relates to the thousands of people that you've been able to help over the years with your knowledge and expertise as it relates to addiction. But the first question I need to ask you is, what is a good, solid, understandable, non-clinical definition of addiction?
I think that an outstanding definition, Renaud, is to deal with the pursuit of pleasure at the expense of freedom.
Would you say that again?
The pursuit of pleasure at the expense of freedom. I happened to be reading some information one day, and I happened to stumble across those words. And it made so much sense in relationship to what I do that I took that phrase and I've never let it go. Because it explains so much when you just deal with the whole onslaughts and the different variables of addiction, that when you're talking about drug addiction or any kind of addiction, it is something that you pursue. You have to impose this upon yourself.
You know, we were talking earlier and you told me that the clinical definition of addiction, one of the key factors in the definition of addiction, and it's broken down in the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 4,
Absolutely.
Which clinicians and doctors and social workers, psychologists and psychiatrists use, that they talk about abuse and dependency. We're not going to go in detail with that tonight because we're giving the viewers an overview. But one thing that stood out that you shared with me was the fact that they talk about the continuous use despite the consequences.
Right, right. Right.
But I like the definition that you work with. The pursuit of pleasure
at the expense of freedom. And it really just simply just talks about an individual actually going after something, and going after something, not even aware of any consequences. They're looking for something, and all they're looking for is pleasure. And there's an expense that goes along with this pursuit. There's a cost with it. The pursuit of pleasure at the expense of your freedom. And so even though a person goes into this very deeply, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, it's what they give up seeking this pleasure that is the main factor in why addiction sometimes is not detectable.
So at the onset, for some people, and correct me if I'm wrong, it appears that they may be using or abusing drugs, alcohol, gambling, food, and the list goes on. We're going to talk about those things. And then the tables get turned on them, and they're seeking pleasure so much that they find that they can't even operate or live without having the pleasure senses in the brain to be triggered on a regular basis to release the necessary pleasure?
Well, naturally, the simple brain functioning is that the brain by itself